Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. It's a very busy night here in the western suburbs of Chicago. And from where you are listening, I'm sure it's the same. And that gives me an opportunity to thank you so much for listening in. We always say about GPS, it is available to everyone, the neighbor next door, the relative across the country. Please do share this resource. They're all virtual. If you go to glenbardgps.org, you'll see the 50 offerings that we have this year on just about any topic that really concerns well-being. And that's our topic tonight. I can't think of a better time for this particular conversation. I want to thank all the sponsors who make GPS possible. We couldn't do it without you. You just saw the annual sponsors and the promotional partners who spread the word. And we ask you to do the same. If you're a social media person, like us, share us. We want everyone to know that we're here. Before we begin, I want to tell you very briefly about what is upcoming in the next few days around the Glenbard Parent Series. This topic tonight leads beautifully into the community read next Wednesday on the 27th, when Adam Braun will be talking about his book, The Promise of a Pencil, the story of how an ordinary person can create extraordinary change. What a perfect companion tonight's program is to that presentation. And then the next night, there is a program in Gujarati about mental health and being the parent you want to be. That's on the 28th. Then we're into October. And speaking of anxiety, this is a program that will also relieve your anxiety as we talk about the truth behind college admission, a family's guide to getting in, staying in, and staying sane in the process. That's on Tuesday, the 3rd. And then we'll come back once again to self-compassion when we meet with Dr. Yael Schonbrun, who will be talking about her book, Work, Parent, Thrive, on Thursday, the 5th at noon and 7 p.m. So go to the website. Oh, yes. And we can't forget Dr. Bruce Perry with his important book, co-authored by Oprah, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing, a shift from what is wrong with you. On October 11th, that is the first time we will be welcoming Dr. Perry to the Glenbard Parent Series. This time, we're going to get right into it, and I'm going to ask Krista Gifford, who is a family and consumer sciences teacher at Glenbard South and the hard-working chairman of the Glenbard Wellness Committee, and she will do the honors for the introduction. Krista, take it away.
Thank you, Gilda. All right, well, let me have introduce to you Shelly Tygielski. So after spending 20 years in corporate America, Shelly Tygielski started following her lifelong passion, which was mindfulness and meditation. She began to fuse this passion with her purpose, building community through connection to others and ensuring access to well-being for all. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, she founded the Pandemic of Love movement and was honored by CNN Heroes in 2020 for her efforts to support those in need. In 2022, she co-founded Partners in Kind, a television and film production company that aims to invest in projects that highlight important issues through powerful storytelling, generate impact, and inspire change. Shelly shared her methods of self-care in her book published in 2021, New World Library, titled Sit Down to Rise Up, How Radical Self-Care Can Change the World, which was honored as a gold winner of the Nautilus Book Award and a finalist for the Fall 2021 Big Idea Book Club. We are delighted to welcome her to the Glenbard Parent Series today for this very important conversation. Shelly?
Thank you so much, Krista. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. I'm really overjoyed to be with you all today, especially now that I know so much more through Gilda and through the team about Glenbard and the mission of this series. And as a mindful activist, I was really thrilled when we landed on this topic of self-compassion and this topic of self-love, which for most people seems individualistic in terms of its pursuit, right? Because the word self is in there. However, what I'm going to focus on in this talk is really about how self-love and self-compassion really is not just inner work. It actually connects very explicitly to the outer world and to the world around us. So mindfulness, self-love, self-care tangibly inform and motivate and propel us, inspire us to show up in a world that is literally and proverbially on fire right now. So before we get started, I just want to take one moment to honor each of you that showed up for yourselves today in this moment. It's a great feat to be able to do this, whether you're a parent or a parent and a teacher or an administrator. It's not inherently understood that you would have the time or the space and that you had to really create that to be here. So I wanted to start first with a really short passage from Daniel Quinn's award-winning philosophical novel, Ishmael. And in the book, he writes and describes a sinking ship. He says, the ship was sinking and sinking fast. The captain told the passengers and the crew, we've got to get the lifeboats in the water right away. But the crew said, no, first, we have to end capitalistic oppression of the working class, and then we'll take care of the lifeboats. And then all the women on the boat said, no, well, first, we want equal pay for our work. The lifeboats can wait. The minorities said, first, we need to end racial discrimination, and then seating in the lifeboats can be allotted fairly. And the captain replied that these are all important issues, but they won't matter a damn if we don't survive. We've got to lower the lifeboats right away. But then this continued on. And other groups, such as the socialists, came and said, nope, first we must redistribute the wealth. And once that's done, everyone will work equally hard at lowering the lifeboats. And the animal rights activists said, first we must end the use of animals in medical experiments. We can't let this be subordinated to the lowering of the lifeboats. And finally, guess what happened? The ship sank. And because none of the lifeboats had been lowered, every single person drowned. And the last thought of more than one of them was, I never dreamed that solving humanity's problems would take so long, or that the ship would sink so suddenly. So I invite you in this moment to put your hand or hands on your heart, if you feel so inclined, and I invite you to lower your gaze or to close your eyes, whichever feels more comfortable to you, if you're in a safe space, if you're not driving. And let's just take a moment to arrive together here tonight. Let's leave the residue from the entire day behind us by taking a few cleansing deep breaths in through the nose, and inhale, and an exhale out through the mouth. And again, inhaling in through the nose, long, slow, deep breath, and exhaling out. And from this space of presence, begin to quietly name all of the travesties, the atrocities, the anxiety-inducing ills, things that are happening in your life, in your community, in the world. And how does it feel in your heart center at this moment? Does it feel like too much to hold? Does it feel heavy? And so with your hands still on your heart, repeat silently to yourself after me. The best version of the world starts with the best version of me. The best version of the world starts with the best version of me. So lowering your hands, opening your eyes or widening your gaze. Let's head back together to that proverbially sinking ship for a moment. This dreaded blue and green swirling ship, the pale blue dot, to quote my favorite scientist, Carl Sagan, that is hurling through space. This one sinking ship that we all live on. How do we get out of our own way and out of each other's way to ensure that we have a chance? That we have a chance to make things better and to make things better for our children and our grandchildren and all of our descendants. Well, how do we do that? Well, we connect the inner work, which is the work of the heart, to the outer world. And the way that we do that, are you ready for this? Is simple, because I'm going to share the secret of life with you. Yeah, the secret of life. And it took me close to 45 years or more, actually, a little bit, to discover it. And it's probably not what you think. It has nothing to do with owning the right things or achieving the right goals or having a certain pedigree. And it has nothing to do with loving people the right way or, achieving happiness at all points of your life. The secret to life is this: show up. Show up for yourself and for others. Show up physically to create safe spaces. Show up consistently. Show up even when others don't show up. And to show up in a way that makes other people feel held. And show up in a way that makes you feel held by others. And those were actually the opening words in the introduction of my book, Sit Down to Rise Up. And I know that some of you might be scratching your head and thinking, what? That's it? That's the secret of life? That's how we're going to stop the ship from sinking? And my response to the skeptics out there is this, unequivocally, yes. That's it. It's that simple. We don't need to overcomplicate it. And I can prove it. So I'm going to share my screen very quickly because I want to show you some proof. So this is a photo of me sitting at the beach in South Florida in the early days of fall 2015. And these were my Sunday mornings, a clearing in the dense forest of my busy life, so to speak, as the head of a company with thousands of employees, who was also trying to be a present mother and a daughter and a wife and a responsible global citizen. And now we don't have time for this conversation in this presentation, but I want to tell you that as a more awake or self-aware individual in my life today, I no longer live my life centered around goals. In fact, I live my life centered around intentions. And on one particular Sunday in October of that year, I sat on the beach, and the words of intention that kept washing over me like waves crashing ashore were connection and community. Connection and community. So that evening, with the looming Monday morning dread hanging over me, I posted on my Facebook page, wondering out loud if anybody would want to join me on the beach on a Sunday morning for a guided meditation. And several people responded, and we settled on a date and a time in mid-November, a few weeks later. And now I need you to know that there are thousands of reasons why I could have stopped myself from writing that post, which in this case, metaphorically, is the lowering of the lifeboats. For example, although I had been a meditation practitioner for 20 years at that point, I had never formally guided anyone in meditation. And I could have told myself that I wasn't credentialed enough or good enough or worthy enough, right? We do this to ourselves all the time. And I could have said, what's the point of putting myself out there? No one's going to show up. Just could have told myself many different stories. But I wrote the post and I hit submit. And I showed up on November 15th, 2015, a blustery day and a gloomy day in South Florida where it looked like the sky would unleash its fury on us. And guess what happened? 12 other people showed up that morning too. So now I'm going to show you the next slide. And this is what happened. So that's me standing up in front of all of these people. That's me where the blue arrow is. Over the course of 6 months, those 12 friends told their friends, who told their friends, who told their friends. And what started out with the power of one person, me, and then a dozen people, became a community of over 15,000 people who would gather to meet on most Sunday mornings. And this was going on for almost 5 years until March of 2020, when the pandemic hit. So now I have to tell you that I suffer from imposter syndrome, like many of you might. And yes, even to some degree now today, teaching. And I speak a lot about this in my writings and posts. And I can assure you that even as my community grew larger and larger, I found myself addressing bigger and bigger audiences each week. I kept thinking that this was all a fluke, that this was just a coincidence of sorts, that this happened. It was like the right place at the right time, etc. Because I kept telling myself that simply showing up is too easy of an answer to the world's afflictions. But here's the thing. I kept showing up for things in a similar way, and big things continued to happen. So, a case in point, in September of 2016, feeling deeply into the connection and community that was calling me still, I decided to rent the Performing Arts Center in Fort Lauderdale, which is a huge venue, which thousands of seats. And I sold out an event called Broward Meditates, because Broward County is the name of the county where Fort Lauderdale is. And I have to tell you that I had no clue what I was doing, but I learned how to fly the plane as I was building it. And a few months later, I was invited to do the same type of event now in front of 15,000 people at the American Airlines Arena right before a Miami Heat game. And again, you know, I could give you so many more examples of this that happened between 2016 and then fast forward to 2020. But let me just kind of delve right into March of 2020. And this is when the pandemic started, right? And you all can kind of take yourself back to 3.5 years ago to the duress and the confusion and the fear that everybody was feeling, regardless of socioeconomic status or, you know, what your lot in life is. There was a lot of fear of the unknown at that time. And in March of 2020, as I was sitting around my kitchen table, distraught over the inevitability of everything closing down due to stay-at-home orders, I thought about the people in my community who were already struggling to make ends meet. The people who couldn't fill their fridge and just stay at home because they didn't have the means to do so. Or those individuals who relied on free and reduced lunch and breakfast for their children at school every day, right? All of a sudden they would have to provide 10 additional meals a week for their children. Or those who had no Wi-Fi, or those who, you know, lived alone or were immunocompromised. And so from that feeling of despair and feeling helpless and hopeless, I was able to show up for my community and start a global grassroots volunteer-led mutual aid organization. So that organization is called Pandemic of Love, which is still in existence. You can go to the website, pandemicoflove.com. And Pandemic of Love was initially just built for my meditation community, the people that you saw in the picture. But within 24 hours of posting 2 very simple Google forms, and I'm not a technologically savvy person, I posted 2 forms, a give help form, if you're a person who could afford to give help to somebody, and a get help form. That post went around the world and came back. And we suddenly had hundreds and hundreds of people who needed help and who wanted to offer it across dozens of communities and across many countries. So fast forward to today, which is 2023, and 3.5 years later, the organization was featured on over 100 media outlets, including CNN Heroes. And our network of over 4,500 volunteers have now managed to connect over 4.5 million people who have directly transacted amongst themselves. So a person needs a phone bill paid, a person pays their phone bill directly. right? They've transacted over $100 million of aid. And it's incredible because other than just, meeting the need of financial need or something, being offered that's like tangible or material, I should say, the need that is realized and met even more so is the human connection that takes place, the showing up part. And so now let's get to the tangible stuff. Now I kind of set this up and I want to now delve into sharing some practices with you and taking this back to the inner outer connection. Because while it may sound like I'm reading my resume here, I'm really just trying to offer you tangible proof of what is possible when we show up for ourselves first, then for others, and how we can start small, the power of one. And so there's a Buddhist proverb that comes to mind here, and this is my favorite mantra even, right? I use it often, almost daily, to remind myself that yes, the problems of the world, maybe sometimes even the problems in my life I may feel helpless, they may seem hopeless, but the proverb is this, that we can all tend to the area of the garden that you can reach. Tend to the area of the garden that you can reach. So how can each one of you that is on this webinar today leave here today with a practical tool, an inquiry that can help you generate ripples of influence in your community and beyond? And ripples of influence, the acronym for that is ROI. So there's like a reframe of the terminology of ROI there. So how can you commit today to lowering the lifeboats, even if the world isn't perfect, even if you didn't finish that certification yet, or even if you are still in therapy, or even if you feel broken in so many ways, or unworthy, or told yourself that you're not good enough? How can you move beyond the inner work, right? The inner work that matters, and not ever skip over it? So let's start here. Let's start with a simplified version of something that I learned reading Joseph Campbell. So Joseph Campbell describes the universe as a big circle. And he says that in this big circle, the universe, there is a line going through the universe. There's a line going through this circle. And everything that we are not aware of is below the line. Everything that we are aware of is above the line. And when we're living in a state of blame or fear, what we're doing is we're actually living in a smaller sense of who we are. We are living as a victimized self, or as an offended self, or a helpless self, or an unworthy self. And we're not providing self-love to ourselves, so we are below the line, below that line. And when we start to practice self-awareness, what happens is that we begin to recognize these versions of the self that we have. And we begin to break the surface and move above the line. And so here we are today. And the assumption that I'm going to make is that you're attending this session today because you're somewhere on a journey, whether you're just starting a journey or you're decades in, and that you are in a state, whatever a part of that linear state that you're in, of waking up from some sort of a trance of not knowing yourself, or of becoming or being aware of your emotions, or being capable of identifying them and really getting in there. And so in this portion of our time together, I'm going to share a technique with you that I use every single time I show up, every time that I feel despair or fearful or outraged about the state of the world, the state of my community, or even the state of my household. Every single time that I feel like I'm below the line, I'm feeling unworthy, or I'm feeling not compassionate no compassion for myself. And I call this technique after the rain. And essentially, what comes after the core practice of R.A.I.N, R-A-I-N, because I feel that just R.A.I.N alone can fall short of connecting the inner work to the outer world. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the practice of R.A.I.N, it's an acronym, and it was developed by meditation teacher Michelle McDonald about 20 years ago. And I'm going to briefly run through it with you, and we'll practice together. But I will say that if you're unfamiliar with it or you want to learn more, Tara Brach is a really great teacher who uses this acronym often, and there's a lot of free resources that you can find on her website. So the R of R.A.I.N stands for recognize, as in, let me recognize what I'm feeling and where I'm feeling it in my body, how it's showing up. Let me recognize what I am doing, how I'm reacting because of what I'm feeling. And the A stands for allow. Allowing means that we don't try to get rid of it. We just make space for it. The I stands for investigate. And it means that we're willing to get in there. We're willing to roll up our sleeves and understand what is going on. We're willing to make contact with the alien life form that has landed on our planet, as scary as it may be. And the N stands for nurture, meaning that we bring grace and a gentle kindness to what's there that we've identified during that investigation. And one of the things we're taught as mindfulness practitioners is that through nurture, we can loosen the identification. And if we rest after, we can sense that there's a lot more presence and space and kindness that creates a path for us to move forward. So R.A.I.N ends with the letter N, nurture, but the practice doesn't end there. And what I'll be talking about a little later is that, as you know, Dolly Parton said, the rainbows come after the rain, right? But first, let's get to the core practice. So R.A.I.N is a practice of self-compassion. And I will say this to you, compassion for others isn't possible until we are willing to feel what we really feel first. We have to be willing to get in there and really contact what's in there. But the given is this: the process is going to be uncomfortable. And the thing is that if we avoid this discomfort, we're actually cutting ourselves off from our own hearts. We're cutting ourselves off from our full awareness. And we're going back to Joseph Campbell, we're going below the line. And so to me, one of the great, elegant teachings of, Eastern philosophy is that we suffer because we forget who we really are. We get narrowed into a sense of a defended self, or a fearful self, or even a victimized self over the years, right? Of just living, just being in this society. And we sort of really move further and further away and forget who we are. We forget what we're capable of, what one person is really capable of changing and starting and doing. So I'm going to give you an example of how R.A.I.N works, and then we're going to get closer to having you practice it yourself. So one woman who we were working with was in a major conflict with her daughter, feeling a tremendous amount of anger and blame. And her daughter was a senior in high school. She was smoking a lot of pot. Her grades were going down. And so this divide between mother and daughter kept opening up wider and wider, because the more her mother was angry and blaming, the more the daughter shut down and withdrew. And I don't know if any of you have ever had anything like this happen to you. But we started working with the R.A.I.N practice. And the recognize, the R, right? Recognize, was anger. She found that when she identified recognized what was going on there, she recognized, I'm angry at my daughter. And I'm also angry at myself for what's going on. And the allow was, well, okay, so let's let it be there. Let it be there without judgment, without reaction. And the investigate is the beautiful question of where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? And so we start with the inner, because when you're investing, you start with yourself, right? You don't skip yourself trying to have compassion for someone else, because that's premature compassion and it won't have power. You first have to bring the attention inward. And so you've recognized and allowed, okay, my daughter is angry, she's blaming. Where does it hurt? And she could feel, the mother could feel this inside of herself, this fear that her daughter's life was going to get ruined. And then really the shame that she was not being a good parent. And there was this belief that she was feeling that I'm failing. And I'm failing at the thing that matters the most to me. So this is a really big aha moment. And it can lead to an ouch feeling. And when you really investigate and get in touch, there's an ouch, but it's a tolerable ouch if you're present enough. So she felt that ouch, this kind of a soul sadness, because she sensed how long and how much she had been moving through her life as a mother, feeling like in some way she was failing, feeling like she was falling short. So she was recognizing and allowing and investigating and feeling that ouch. And then, hands to the heart, nurture is just what I'm doing now, right? As you explored earlier, it can be so powerful. So for the mom, it was about bringing her hands to her heart. And often with nurture, and there's many different ways, and I'll name a few, but often it's just offering the words that are going to be the most healing in that moment. And so even if you don't put your hands on your heart, that's okay. There are so many different ways to nurture an inner state. But this particular woman found that the more that she did that, the more she got stuck and recognized and allowed and investigated and then brought kindness to herself, the more she was able to begin to move from the inner world to the outer world, which was her daughter. And so for her, the nurture was what she needed to hear, right? In her inner child. I'm sorry and I love you. Just that message to herself. I'm sorry and I love you. And after that, she'd start to feel this shift. She was more resting in that kind of compassionate awareness than she was the angry mother or the victimized mother. And in other words, her identity, her sense of identity shifted. And she was able to show up differently for her daughter. And that is the core of transformation. That's what self-compassion and self-love can do. When you go from this narrative about a successful person, a person that's got this kind of personality, a fearful person, a failing person, to just that space of tenderness, wakefulness, of mindful awareness, from that space, from that shifted identity, from that enlarged sense of beingness, she could really look at her daughter and ask her daughter the same question. Where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? That's when she could do it. And when she could do that, she could see that her daughter was just a senior in high school, afraid of what's coming next, who was trying to run away from her fears, but, just acting out. And she could begin with her daughter to communicate from a place of presence, a place that isn't going to make her daughter defensive. Where does it hurt? It's such an important inquiry. And I think each of us knows that if we're living inside a place of judgment towards another person or towards a group of people, or if we lash out or if we freak out a bit, what happens? When that happens, it just creates more distance. It creates more cycles of violence, of disconnection. And so we call on this, and it's really on the wings of self-compassion, of self-love, of mindfulness, of awareness, that when you hear the word R.A.I.N, it's not just another strategy. It's a way of bringing mindfulness and compassion to places where there is distance or conflict or where there are difficult emotions. And we always start with the inner, and then we widen out the ripples of influence. We widen the circles, eventually to the outer. So now I want to share, so that we could drop in together, I want to share a story, a sermon actually, that I heard at a retreat many, many years ago. And I got in touch with this woman who wrote it. Her name is Nancy Dahlberg. She's a Unitarian minister. And I was so moved by it when I heard it the first time. And I asked her if I could use it in my book and also in retreats. And she gave me permission to do so. And so Nancy writes this. She describes, it's Sunday, Christmas. Our family has spent the holiday in San Francisco with my husband's parents, but to get back to work the next day, we had to drive the 400 miles to Los Angeles on Christmas Day. We stopped for lunch in King City. And we walked into a diner, one of those places where everybody was silent and everything was quiet and there wasn't much going on. And I sat Eric, our 1-year-old, in a high chair and looked around the room and wondered, what am I doing in this place? No sense of really the holidays. And my revelry was interrupted when I heard Eric squeal with glee. Hi there. 2 words you thought were one. Hi there. He pounded his fat baby hands whack, whack on the metal high chair tray, and his face was alive with excitement, his gum bared in a toothless grin, and he wriggled and chirped, and I saw the source of his merriment, and my eyes couldn't take it all in at once. A tattered rag of a coat bought by someone obviously eons ago, both ends zipper half-mast over his spindly body. His toes that poked out of would-be shoes, a shirt that had ring around the collar all over it, and a face with gums as bare as Eric's. Hair uncombed, whiskers too short to be called a beard, but way beyond a shadow. A nose so filled with varicose veins that it looked like a map of New York. And I was too far away to smell him, but I knew he smelled. And his hands were waving in the air, flapping on loose wrists. Hi there, baby. Hi there, big boy. I see you, Buster. And my husband and I exchanged a look that was crossed between what do we do and part devil. And Eric continued to engage and laugh and answer, hiya. Every call was echoed. And I noticed waitresses' eyebrows shoot to their foreheads. Several people hemmed out loud. This old geezer created a nuisance with my beautiful baby. And I shoved a cracker at Eric and he pulverized it on the tray. And I whispered to him, why me, under my breath. Our meal came and the nuisance continued. And the next thing you know, the bum was shouting from across the room, do you know patty cake? What a boy. Do you know peekaboo? Hey, look, everyone. He knows peekaboo. But nobody thought It was cute. That guy was probably a drunk, definitely a disturbance. And I was embarrassed. And my husband, Dennis, was humiliated. We ate in silence, except for Eric, who was running through his repertoire for his blaring applause from a Skid Row bum. And finally, I had enough. I turned the high chair, and Eric screamed and clamored to face his old buddy. And now I was really mad. So Dennis went to pay the check and implored me to get Eric and meet me in the parking lot. And I trundled Eric out of the high chair and looked towards the exit. And the only way out was past the man who sat poised and waiting, his chair directly between me and the door. "Oh Lord," I said, "just let me out of here before he speaks to me or Eric." And I headed to the door. But it soon became apparent that both the Lord and Eric had other plans. And as I drew closer to the man, I turned my back, walking to sidestep him and any air he might be breathing. And as I did, Eric, all the while eyes riveted to his best friend, leaned far over my arm, reaching with both arms out in a baby pick-me-up position. And in a split second, I went from balancing my baby to turning towards the counter for weight, and I came eye to eye with the old man. Eric was lunging for him, arms spread wide. The bum's eyes both asked and implored, "Would you let me hold my baby?" There was no need for me to answer, because Eric propelled himself from my arms into the man's, and suddenly a very old man and a very young baby were involved in a loving relationship. Eric laid his tiny head on the man's ragged shoulder. The man's eyes closed, and I saw tears hover beneath his lashes. His aged hands, full of grime and pain and hard labor, gently, so gently, cradled my baby's bottom and stroked his back. And I just stood there, awestruck, as the man rocked and cradled Eric for a few moments. And then his eyes opened and set squarely on mine. And he said in a firm and commanding voice, "You take care of this baby." And somehow I managed to say, "I will," from a throat that contained a stone. He pried Eric from his chest unwillingly, longingly, as though he wasn't ready to give him up. And I held my arms open and ready to receive my baby boy, and again the gentleman addressed me. "God bless you, ma'am. You've given me my Christmas gift." And I said nothing more than a muttered thanks. And with Eric back in my arms, I ran for the car. And Dennis wondered why I was crying and holding Eric so tightly, and why I kept saying again and again, my God, forgive me, forgive me." And I remember listening to being told that story at a retreat. And I was sitting next to somebody that had a very visible disability. And I was crying and they were crying. And then they leaned over to me and said, "That was me." And I knew which one they were. Because I think maybe we've all been in some point in our lives, aloof, not seeing who's there, or maybe feeling like we're not being seen. And so the path of compassion, of self-compassion, wakes us up out of that trance. With those who are closest to us, it's really the hope, I think, also of our society, that we can slow down enough and really look to see who's there. And then we can respond with an open heart. And so now from here, from this place of like, just feeling emotionally centered. Let's practice together. So if you're in a place, a safe space, a safe place, a place where you feel comfortable, and you can sit in a position where you can let your attention flow inward without distraction, I'll ask you to lower your gaze or close your eyes, whichever might feel better for you. And just invite you to arrive right here and just begin to feel or sense your body sitting here, breathing. And maybe just take a moment to take a few long, deep inhales in through the nose and exhaling out through the mouth. So now bringing to mind, into your mind's eye or into your consciousness or into your awareness, some situation in your life right now, another person, where you can sense the barrier, that there's some separation or some type of blaming or resentment or a judgment. A relationship where you would like to explore how you can have more awareness and peace and kindness. And just let yourself go as if you're watching a movie of this relationship, bringing yourself to the frame that most expresses the conflict or what causes the conflict, or where it's the most difficult. Maybe you can totally see the person's face, or maybe you hear their voice, or you can sense what they're saying or replaying it. And now let yourself be aware of the kind of feelings that come up for you. What triggers the blame or the anger or the separation? Begin by just recognizing that really cleanly. Like you're asking yourself a question of, what is happening inside of me at this moment? That's the question for recognition. What does it feel like when you think of this person or a situation with this person? What do you feel? Name it. Blame, anger, whatever you notice, name it. And then the A of R.A.I.N is to allow it. In other words, don't add that judgment, like this shouldn't be happening, or I should be doing something about this. Just let it be. Allow it. And the allowing is an invitation. It creates space for something new and different, a possibility. And then we move to the I, right? Which is investigating. It's to go inside more. With the I, you're going to ask yourself, what's really happening inside of me? And you might sense the feelings that are the strongest, the most present. Maybe even the subconscious feelings. So maybe there's this belief going on about how that person is thinking about you, or what they believe about you, or what it may mean that they're acting this way. Maybe you're telling yourself a story that they don't value you or respect you. And if that belief is there, then allow that belief to go more deeply inward into the body. What does it feel like physically? Where do you sense it in your body? Maybe your neck or your chest or your stomach or your heart center. Really feel the reaction. And you might let your face take the expression that you get caught in when you're in a situation, when you take the blame, the hurt, or the shame. Because as part of investigating, you might wonder, as part of the past, what is familiar about this? Right? Not to analyze it, but really just to sense the link, because it's never just one person. It's a patterning. And you might ask yourself the important question of, where does it hurt? Where are you feeling the most vulnerable? And I find that as I ask myself these questions, that if I put my hand on my heart, it helps connect me more. I listen more deeply. So you might experiment now, and if you've never done it before, let it be an experiment. Sensing the vulnerable void inside and asking, what does this part of me, this heart, need the most right now? What's the quality of care that would be the most helpful? And then just listen. Listen inwardly. Sometimes the vulnerability needs that we let it be okay that it's there. And sometimes it needs a message of kindness. And sometimes just the touch. You might vary the touch, right? It actually conveys tenderness. This is nurture. And you might call on your most awake heart. Some people call it their future self. It's a self that is already here, but who you are evolving into, right? An awakened heart that offers care inwardly, self-care. So sense if you can offer words or kindness to yourself. And just notice what happens as you're both the holder and the held. When you offer kindness and allow yourself to feel vulnerable. Sense the kindness of your own being, noticing whatever shifts might be here. And as you begin to bring to mind this other person, you might notice what your deepest intention is. How do you want to be relating to this person? What is your deepest intention? And from that place of the awakened heart, from that intention, begin to let that person come into a closer view or sense them more deeply. Beginning to recognize and allow what that person is going through. Now we're turning the attention from the inner to the outer. What is that person going through? And to investigate with the question, where does it hurt? Can you see how that person might have their leg stuck in a trap? How that person may be afraid and insecure, or feel hurt or threatened, or have unmet needs that are playing out, right? Where does it hurt? And then the nurturing for the other person is to include that person in your heart. And one of the great non-dual teachers said that really our freedom is when we don't exclude anyone from our heart. So see if you can send a message of nurture, of forgiveness, of kindness to that person. And if it doesn't fit right now, and it might not, just sense your intention, because your intention can open the door. And notice who you are when your heart is beginning to include another. And so now just take one deep cleansing breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And you can widen your gaze and open your eyes. And so first I want to honor you and thank you, because you never know what you're going to get in a guided practice. And certainly this isn't an easy practice. It's one that kind of takes a certain amount of willingness and presence. So now that we have the R.A.I.N down in the last 5 minutes, I want to delve into what comes after the R.A.I.N. First comes empathy, and then comes action. So the after the R.A.I.N part, empathy and then action, is also scientifically called sometimes the tend and befriend theory. And what that is it's a theory that builds on the observation that human beings affiliate in response to stress. So under conditions of threat, they, and more often than not, women, but they tend to their offspring to ensure their survival, and they affiliate with others for joint protection and for comfort. And these responses are underpinned by an affiliative neurocircuitry. So to simplify things, because I'm not a brain scientist, I just call it empathy action mode. That's what comes after the R.A.I.N, and I can wrap my head better around it. So we go through the R, the A, the I, the N, right? The nurture. We identify what we're feeling, and then we have 2 follow-up questions after the nurture. The first question is, and this is where the showing up takes place. So you've recognized what you're feeling about what's happening in the world, in your community, in your household. Recognized, you allowed, you investigated, you nurtured yourself. You were able to then turn compassion towards somebody else. The follow-up question is, what can I tangibly do, however small I might think it may be, about what I have recognized, allowed, investigated, and nurtured? What can I tangibly do, right? What area of the garden can I tend to? And second question is important, is how do I make sure that this tangible action, this response, is coming from a place of love? How can I make sure that this is coming from a place of love? Because sometimes we can go through the entire process, we can think of a response. The response may be reactionary. Maybe it's rooted in anger and it's not coming from a place of love, right? So that is the litmus test. That's a very important question. And so that's really, the core of it all, that we should tend to the area of the garden that we should reach. We should always come from a place of love. But the only way that we can come from a place of love is if we first administer self-love. The only way that we can come into the world offering compassion is if we first offer ourselves compassion. And that's where I'll leave you with this offering. And I hope that it was useful, enlightening, and that you have a tangible practice that you can share with your peers, with family members, with others, and something to default into when you're feeling really stressed.
This couldn't have come from a better time. I know Krista wants to say something. I'll throw it to you for a minute, Krista.
Okay, sure. Well, thanks, Shelly. I guess just a takeaway that I had was just, self-compassion that you said is necessary to connect and motivate us to show up. And we don't have to do anything or nothing. There's nothing we have to do or be before we can show up. That's enough. That's enough.
Yeah. It's a nice bookend to what we talked about before we started this conversation. Yeah. Thank you.
It is challenging time, and tonight's talk was the talk for the times. So I thank you, Shelly, for coming to the Glenbard Parent Series and sharing this with us. Thank you, Krista. This is where we normally go hug the kids, but we'll also go like this, and then we'll go hug the kids.
There you go. I love that. Perfect. Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Be well, everyone. Thank you.